Okay, I think we can start. Let's do this. Oh, here comes somebody.
Yes, this house.
So let's do this for the pure motivation of leading all limitless Mother and Father sentient beings to the ultimate. So this is a little bit of a continuation of last week, but it's also looking at things from a completely different point of view, so it'll be okay on its own too. Last week we were talking about negative emotions and how they, in the human realm, sustain, nourish, protect the ego. When a little child first learns to say no, they often want to say it over and over because it really gives them a sense of self and a sense of a little bit of power and so on. And so it's through negative emotions that your sense of self is preserved and maintained. So we talked about the ego view last week. Sorry, my allergies are really kicking up today. I think spring must have arrived. So we talked about trying to identify the ego view behind any negative emotion as a step toward finding the overview, in which case the negative emotion disappears. So today I want to talk about it from a different point of view. I've talked about this before, but in meditation it happens that every once in a while you start to release the stranglehold you have on your artificial sense of reality, and boundaries start to dissolve, the sense of self starts to dissolve, and you start moving toward what Tsultrim Rinpoche calls luminosity. Luminosity is the natural state of mind. Your mind is naturally luminous, and through all the negative arisings and so on, that luminosity is kept in check and suppressed. But every once in a while in meditation you might start moving toward that. And if you were to let that process continue, it would result in some realization or awakening. The sense of self would dissolve, boundaries would dissolve, the oneness of everything would become apparent, and you would dissolve into that. So when that happens, the skandhas really don't like it. Because you're moving into the unknown. And the ego and the skandhas like the known. They like to keep you in your comfort zone. Even if you're miserable in it, they still prefer that to the unknown. So when your sense of self starts to dissolve and boundaries between things start to dissolve, the skandhas panic, the ego panics, and a negativity is generated to bring you back to your comfort zone. There was one point in my life, about 15 years ago, I was meditating quite intensely. 10 hours a day on non-work days and about 5 hours on work days. And I started to notice a new phenomenon, which I've mentioned before, that I'd never experienced before, and that's that I would appear to become very, very calm, very focused, very much into the meditation. And all of a sudden, the mind would generate a daydream about some imaginary dispute with an imaginary person, and we would hire imaginary lawyers and go to imaginary court and fight it out until some imaginary victory was won by somebody. And I was really puzzled why this was happening, and it wasn't until quite a few years later that I realized that I had been in a state where boundaries and sense of self were starting to dissolve, and the mind didn't like that. It wanted to get me back to the comfort zone, and it did it through a negative daydream. So the most common one to get back if you're really meditating and things are going really good is fear. You're getting very calm, everything is starting to fall apart in your nice safe world, and so you generate fear, and that gets you back into the ego, back into the comfort zone, back into samsara. That's the price we pay for not being willing to go into the unknown, is that the negativity brings us back into samsara, which we thought we had already decided was unsatisfactory and we didn't want to be there. But we'd rather be there than someplace unknown, who knows, you know. So that's another function of the ego in terms of maintaining, another function of negative emotions in terms of maintaining and strengthening and protecting the self. And it's a high price to pay, because you want to go beyond suffering. Every time you try to go, a negative emotion comes up and drags you back, and you can't go. So you are stuck in samsara. It's a very high price to pay. There's a picture of Gangaji up there, and I'm pretty sure Eli, the top right, I'm pretty sure Eli, it's from Eli and Gangaji that I first heard this, where some great master described the prison of worldly existence as like being in a large field, and around you there's a circle on the ground. And that's your prison. There's no guards, there's no walls, there's no anything, and you're comfortable in that prison. And then in the distance you can see the mountains and the streams and the forests and different things, and you start to have a longing for freedom, to get out of this prison and to go explore the world and to be free. And so you decide one day to leave, and you start marching bravely, and you get close to the edge, and then before you get to the edge, your mind says, well, wait a minute, if I cross that line, well then what will I do? Where will I go? Who even will I be? It will all be unknown. It could be dangerous. I better think about this. And so you go back to the middle of your prison, and you sit down and you contemplate. And every time you try to escape, fear or another negative emotion arises, and you go back to where you're comfortable, in prison. If it weren't for this function, function of the skandhas, the function of the self, freedom would be very easy to obtain. It doesn't take all that much meditation to calm down and to start letting things go. If the first time that happened, you just let go and continued, it would lead to awakening pretty quickly. But because we're really unwilling to give up the known for the unknown, it makes it a much longer journey. You have to walk up to the edge of the prison 10 times or 100 times or 1,000 times or 1,000,000,000 times, I don't know. And it's only when you really, really can't take it anymore in prison that you're willing to take the leap. Namjal used to find this quite paradoxical, because whenever a being takes a leap into the unknown, there is absolutely no possibility of anything going wrong. And yet we're convinced that there's great danger in this. It's the safest thing that exists, taking this leap into the unknown, and it always results in bliss and freedom and awakening and clarity and compassion and all of those things every single time. But some part of us is convinced that it's very, very dangerous to consider doing that. There are meditations you can do to reduce fear, of which the chief one is Green Tara in Vajrayana, and in Theravada Buddhism there's 3 or 4 of the practices in the Visuddhimagga that we talked about probably last year that will take you from wherever you are now into a state of absolute fearlessness. And in that state, then fear is no longer going to hold you back. You could still, if you want, get angry or something else. That would work, you know. Darn, they've taken away my cheap weapon here to protect myself. But doing one of the practices that leads to fearlessness is a very, very good idea. And the other way that works is to approach it from the other view that that the divine is out there, and you develop incredible devotion and love for the divine. The divine might be visualized as God, it might be visualized as the Buddha, it might be visualized as enlightenment or any other, many, many possibilities. But you develop such love and trust in it and such longing to be with it that overcomes the fear, and you go. You know? That's another way things can be done. Any questions up to here? So it happens from time to time that beings invest very heavily in one particular negative emotion. Basically, our situation is that we wander through samsara, and from time to time we suffer severely. Sometimes, like now, things are pretty good. Samsara doesn't seem all that bad, but you can be born in extremely difficult, painful circumstances with almost no hope of getting out. So, to minimize the amount of suffering in samsara, we adopt strategies. There's a book, there's a teaching on the Enneagram, which as far as I know was of Sufi origin, where they divide the strategies you can use to cope with samsara into 9, and they further divide each of the 9 into 3 subcategories depending on whether you focus a lot on family and clan, whether you focus a lot on sex and reproduction, or whether you focus a lot on security and wealth and things like that. So it makes up 27 different strategies. And it's really a good teaching to look into. You can, almost all of the categories, whichever one you're in, you can figure it out fairly quickly. But there's 2 or 3 categories that if you're in that category, you always think you're in a different one. So it's a little tricky. But, you know, in leaving the Enneagram for a moment, which is quite precise and detailed, you could imagine that you decide to go through life and you don't want to upset anybody, you don't want to get anybody angry at you, so you're quite passive and meek and so on. And you do that life after life, and pretty soon you get fed up because it doesn't work. You don't get what you want. Other people seem to get more stuff. So then you switch strategies and you become aggressive and you start to go for what you want. And then you get too aggressive and you wind up in jail or get killed or something like that. And so what happens is, if you were to look at the lives of a person over vast amounts of time, they would wander through all of these strategies. And all of the strategies have some good things about them, and they have some bad things about them. And so when you adopt a new strategy, at that time usually you're just seeing the good things, and the bad things become apparent later on, you know. If you look at people that join, say, motorcycle gangs or gangs of any kind, they have a strategy for getting more of what they want and avoiding less of what they don't want, by taking a very aggressive approach and trying to intimidate others and things like that. And for every sort of behavior, you could think of some people that are doing that right now, you know. Some people become hedonists and just try to go for as much pleasure as they can cram into a lifetime. And at the time they don't see the downside to that. I lost my train of thought. Did anybody see it? It was blue and it was heading that way. So the problem is that no strategy works. With whatever strategy you are using, things can go wrong for you, or you might not get what you want, and so on. So some people, as part of their strategies, pick one of the negative emotions and take it to an extreme. So some people will take desire and take it to an extreme. They will basically make that their place of refuge, and they will constantly try to fulfill all kinds of desires over and over and over, try to get as much pleasure as possible. And of course they're not helped by the common belief that you only live once. if you only live once, well, why not try to get as much as you can? Some people will go with anger and hatred and aggression. Some people will go with pride. They will try to build themselves up above others and keep doing that and keep doing that and then take great pride in it. Some people get stuck in envy. And some people get stuck in just plain ignorance. It was always a mystery to me until I got to know a few people who were really, really, totally committed to living in ignorance. And one of the benefits they got from it was that they didn't have any responsibility for their life because they had no idea what's going on. I would have patients come to see me, and I would try to explain to them what's wrong with them, and they would say, no, 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 don't tell me, just give me a prescription or something, you know. And that way, and so they would go through this, and they might get treatment, and it might work. But if it didn't work, then they always had somebody to blame because they had nothing to do with it, you know. They were turning the responsibility for their life over to somebody else. And then if that person didn't handle it the way that they thought it should be, then they could get angry and live in a state of blaming somebody. Some people find the human life too complicated and retreat into ignorance. They don't want to know about things as much as possible. They might have to learn about one thing, you know, in order to get by in the world. They might develop one skill. But there are all kinds of strategies to go into ignorance. So Trungpa, in his commentary on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, pointed out that that all of those choices are described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So, and they don't work out exactly like you thought they would. So if you look at somebody who really gets into hatred, and everything pushes their button and they respond with hatred and anger, what happens after a while is that when they lash out to do harm to whoever it is that they're hating at the moment and who they blame for everything, more and more their lashing out turns back on themselves, and they wind up harming themselves more than anyone else. I used to see on TV many years ago a competitor in a particular field, and it was such that the audience was quite close to the competitors. And he would always pick a fight or get into arguments with the audience that was closest to him. And he seemed to be doing it in order to get into a state of anger and rage and hatred so that he could perform better. But what would always happen would be that it would go too far, and then he would get penalized by the referee for, you know, yelling obscenities at people or something like that. Or he would pick a fight with the referee and get ejected or something like that, you know. And that's the pattern if you choose to go with hatred, anger, and aggression, is that sooner or later the harm that you're trying to do on somebody else actually is turned on you. If you totally invest in hatred, and you die, then you have a chance of going to the realm that is dominated by hatred, which is the hell realm. In the hell realm, everybody pretty much lives in a state of hatred all the time. and they suffer immensely. And they have little hope of getting out of there. They get out eventually, according to Buddhist understanding. But that's the realm associated with investing heavily in hatred. I don't think it's very easy for an ordinary person to get to the hell realm. I mean, I think you really, really have to take it to a level that most of us can't imagine. But there are people in the world doing that, and people build up great, great hatred for various things, and they don't see anything wrong with that, and they live in that state. If you go to an extreme in desire, you wind up in what's some people call the hungry ghost realm. There was a great Mahasiddha named Saraha about 1400 years ago, and he was considered the chief of all the Mahasiddhas, so really probably at that time the highest being on the planet. And he was walking along one day, Saraha was walking along, and he saw a man sitting by the side of the road crying. And he said, "What's wrong?" And the man said, "Well, I'm a glutton. I live to eat. I love all flavors. I love quantity. I love variety. I love everything about food. My whole life is devoted to that. That's all I care about, and I don't have any food. That's why I'm crying." So Saraha said to him, "Do you know what happens to somebody like you when they die?" And he said, "No." And so Saraha showed him a hungry ghost, one or more hungry ghosts, whereupon he uttered the great words, "I don't want that." And he requested teaching. So Saraha taught him how to master Mahamudra by indulging his gluttony. It's a great, great teaching. But there are people in the world today who are devoted to pleasure and desire in various kinds of ways, and they somehow think what they're doing is good. This is the way everybody should live. So one of the consequences of desire is that you build up great attachment. But when you devote yourself to desire, the thing that arises that you might not have seen coming is that you become addicted to new and better pleasures. You know? So you don't want to go to that great Mongolian restaurant you went to last week. You want to find something new, and you discover a new restaurant from Botswana just opened. Well, let's go there, you know. But after a while, there aren't any, you know, after you do them all, it's hard to find new stuff, you know. I mean, the restaurant industry does its best to come up with new stuff. But people who are totally dedicated to desire and fulfilling desire and the pleasure associated with that become very frustrated because they can't get the variety and the newness that they want. And they may have experienced, you know, hundreds and thousands of different cuisines, but they want something new. They may have experienced all other kinds of desires, but there's always this drive for, well, you know, if I've done that before, if I've had that before, I don't want that. I want something new and different. And then that becomes not available, and they get quite frustrated. The next realm up is the animal realm, and if you and it's dominated by ignorance or delusion. If people devote themselves to that in the human realm, what happens is they lead very predictable lives. They might be quite good at what they do. They might be a very good farmer. They might be a very good mechanic. They might be a very good something. But they can't stand anything new and unknown. Everything has to be predictable, safe, done in the same way. They don't want new things coming along. They don't want new ways of doing things. They want it safe and predictable and where they feel comfortable. As you know, the world changes, you know. If you were a barrel maker, well, the world passed you by, and you know, and one by one things are falling apart, you know, like the phone system used to be very secure, but it keeps changing. People can now talk on their computers by things like Skype and so on. You know, the publishing industry, well, just every kind of industry, you know what's happening in the world. Things are changing, and vast industries are having a difficult time because of new ways of doing things. So if you devote yourself to ignorance, the price you pay that will be that change is upsetting and difficult, and if somebody comes along into your environment that doesn't dress the way you do and doesn't look the way you do, maybe of different ethnicity or different race or radically different beliefs or whatever, you find all of that very, very threatening. So the price of going for ignorance as a human being is to wind up being threatened and having a painful, difficult time with change. In the human realm, the human realm has some aspect of desire, but it's a little bit of little bit different than the hungry ghost realm. Trungpa's description of being dedicated to the defilements associated with the human realm is that one becomes quite clever. One will invent something to give yourself an edge, and then somebody else will invent something that takes your edge away, and so you have to invent something. You invent a device, they invent an anti-device. You invent a weapon, they invent a better weapon, or a weapon to, or a device to negate your weapon. And it's this constant drive for more and higher and more complex and competitive. And no one can win those kind of races other than for a short time. You can be the best at something. You can be the best entertainer, but somebody will come along who's better. You can be the best anything, and somebody will come along that eclipses you. There are said to be two levels above the human level. The highest level is the devas, sometimes mistranslated as gods. Deva really means divine, but not God, not gods. These are beings who got everything right in the human realm, and then were reborn into this realm. There's a whole list of high qualities you need in order to get there. But their problem is that then pride arises because they did so well. And in the Dewa realm, there's really no suffering. They really have everything they want. Their big problem is that is preservation. Once you have it all, you have to devote all of your effort to keeping it. And on the human realm, people are very often surprised when they accumulate a lot of money. All of a sudden, well, now they have to work all day, every day to avoid losing it to a corrupt financial advisor or to doing bad investments. One thing that really shocked me some years ago was two very, very rich people in Texas filed for bankruptcy pretty much at the same time. One was John Connolly, who was a lawyer who had been governor of Texas and been in the oil business, ran for president, was incredibly wealthy, and he couldn't preserve it. Somehow he had to file bankruptcy and go back to work. The other that filed right at that same time was the famous heart surgeon Denton Cooley. I had a friend who trained with Denton Cooley. Denton Cooley, he told me, did about 10 open heart surgeries a day. He had lots of assistants who would open the chest and hook the person up to the heart-lung machine. And then Denton Cooley would come into the room and do 15 minutes of highly skilled heart surgery, and then when the patient was stable, then he would leave and go to the next one, and the people there would close the wounds and put the dressings on and all that sort of stuff. And he charged $15,000 per open heart surgery. He did an average of 10 a day. And he'd been doing that for 30 years, and he had to file bankruptcy because he had not been able to protect his wealth. He had followed the advice of financial advisors who put him into real estate and all kinds of things, and all of a sudden the real estate market collapsed and he actually owed more money than he had. So he had to file bankruptcy. And it took him nearly a full day after bankruptcy to make $100,000. It wasn't like it was easy coming back, but a whole day just for $100,000. So when you have it all, if you're living in the human realm, you have to protect and preserve what you have. And it isn't just money. Like, people might have great beauty, and then they start to age, and they do all these incredible things to try protect and preserve that, if that's where it comes from. Or they if they're a great novelist, well, after a while the publisher is saying, well, what have you done lately, and it's hard, and they become victims of stress, and they have trouble sleeping very often because of the stress and the worries that they have about keeping what they have, and at the same time they're very proud of what they have. And they really think that they're special because of that. The other Dewa realm just below them can see them, but they don't have it as good. They don't really have any suffering. They have everything that they want, but they can see this other realm where things are better, and so they are devoted to jealousy and envy and scheming. In the human realm, the similar sort of energy is in the world of diplomats and spies, where everybody is scheming to get some advantage and misrepresenting where they are and all the things that go with that. If you devote yourself to envy and jealousy, you lose the ability to trust. and you wind up generally somewhat isolated, among other things. So all of these strategies have some advantages, especially in the short term. All of these strategies have a significant downside to them, and none of them prevent things like aging and death and so on. It's said in the Tibetan Book of the Dead that very wealthy people have a very hard time going through the bardos, because everything that they had and they were attached to has been ripped away from them. And in the third bardo, they can actually go and observe their relatives and so on, and their relatives might be fighting over their possessions, or they might have some particular possession like a painting or something that they really treasured, and they find that their relatives don't really care about that, they just want the money. So they very often get into great anger and disappointment and things like that, which then drags them down to a less desirable future existence. So each of these strategies has an upside and has a significant downside, and if you devote yourself to them to an extreme, and I really mean very, very extreme, you then, after you die, may not be able to come back to the human realm. You may go to one of these corresponding realms. The corresponding realms, the hell realm is intense suffering. The hungry ghost realm is very intense suffering. The animal realm, for most animals, most of the time, is suffering. Somebody's trying to eat them and they're trying to eat somebody else. Humans tend to have a bit of an idyllic view of the animal realm when they see, horses galloping through the fields on a sunny day and so on. Doesn't look so bad, But if you were to total up all the animals on the planet, very, very few have that kind of existence. Some do, but not too many. And the problem in the animal realm is that they're constantly acting on negativities and tend to spiral downward into worse and worse and worse existences. The suffering in the two higher realms is in the Titan realm or demigod realm, the one that's not the highest. They suffer through envy and jealousy and scheming and all that, even in that realm. Even when conditions are very, very good, they don't have a flesh and blood body, they have a body made of light or something like that. It doesn't get sick, it lives a very, very long time. Things are very good, but they're tormented by this jealousy and so on. And then eventually they fall from that realm. The highest level has everything very good. The downside to that is that they fall from that realm after some immense amount of time. And both of them, when they fall from those realms, they suffer. What has happened in that realm is they have tended to use up all of their good karma, and they have tended not to have any bad karma mature and get rid of it. So if you were to look at their karma bank account, there would be no credits and lots of debits. And so normally they fall back to the human realm as their first birth after this incredibly long stay there. And they have no good karma and lots of bad karma, which means that everything goes wrong for them. You know, when something works out for you, you have a little bit of good karma maturing. When things go really bad for you, you have some bad karma maturing. They don't have any good karma. So their human existence is very frustrating, and they very often wind up getting into states of rage and so on because it's so patently unfair what's happening to them compared to every other human they know. And according to the Buddha, they very typically fall to the hell realm at the end of one human life. They're in the divine realms for millions or billions of years. I don't know how long it is. They fall. They have one human life. They become so negative in that life that they fall to one of the lower realms, usually the hell realm. That's a pretty big downside. And in the hell realm, they have no good karma. They're not going to get the best seat at the table in hell, you know. They're not going to get the best cave. They're not going to get the part where the fire isn't really hot. They're going to get all the opposites of that, you know. I don't know what the hell realm is like, but I don't think it's very good. So your negative emotions are supporting, nourishing, protecting an ego that doesn't exist. And they are promulgating the idea of a self, and when they do that, that means suffering can and will arise, absolutely for sure, sometime. And they are preventing that non-existent self from from freeing itself and going and living in bliss, which is your birthright. So, aside from that, negative emotions are perfectly fine, as far as I know, you know. Some of them are my good friends. We spent lots of time together when I was younger. So, understanding what's going on with negative emotions, it would seem that one should be motivated to do something about it. There are antidotes for each of the negative emotions. If you have a lot of hatred, you can practice loving kindness, a metta practice in Theravada, or you can practice Chenrezig. If you have a lot of desire, the Buddha used to recommend what are called the Asubha meditations. I used to know what that meant, and they include things like meditating on dead bodies and decomposition of bodies and things like that. In the time of the Buddha, people who were totally devoted to desire, who did the Asubha meditations, got rid of desire very, very quickly. It's very effective for that. There are really antidotes for everything. For basic ignorance, which is creating all of the other ones, there are practices like Manjushri, and there are some practices in the Visuddhimagga that accomplish the same thing. But really, what's needed is a great devotion to mindfulness. If you were to practice loving kindness, if you were what the Buddha called a walker in hatred, where you were just full of hatred almost all the time, and you practiced loving kindness, and you'd be sitting there saying, "May all those beings be well and happy," you know, it would take years before you even meant what you said, you know. you would be saying, you know, may that guy that beat me up once, may he be well and happy. Or really, you're wanting him to not be happy, you know. One of the early Karmapas said that, no, not the early Karmapas, the great master who wrote the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas said, negative emotions are hard to cure through antidotes. He said, instead, destroy negative emotions at once, as soon as they arise, through mindfulness. So, my experience has been over the last 50 years that I would practice mindfulness, a negative arising would happen, and 5 minutes later I would be mindful of it. Too late, it's already there. And after 10 years, a negative arising would arise, and 3 minutes after I would become mindful of it. And eventually I had experiences where I was mindful at the very moment that it was being created. And seeing that, it just poofs into thin air and disappears and does not develop. Negative arisings are like allergies. They cascade. So in somebody who has a severe allergy, anaphylaxis, the first thing that happens is one molecule of what they're allergic to meets one molecule or one compound in the body designed to recognize allergies. And that's all it is. It's just, you know, tiny, 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 one meeting one. But what's it called? Antibody? Anyhow, the part of the body that is there reacting against the outside allergen, it then sends out several messages which are picked up by several other similar things, and then they send out several messages, and within 30 seconds you have millions or billions of these messages that were under attack from a man eating peanut, you know, and all hands on deck, you know. So in the development of hatred, what will happen if you are very mindful is that a suggestion by the skandhas will arise, and it will be there, and it will have absolutely no power of its own. But if it's picked up, then it cascades, like a bunch of things happen, and then each one of those bunch of things cause a bunch more things, and within a minute or 2 or 5 minutes, you know, you're in full-blown hatred. And it's very hard once it's past that first moment to do anything about it effectively. You can, but it's difficult. So if you're mindful at the moment that the inclination for a negative arising to arise is first there, seeing it, knowing the consequences of letting it develop, you will simply look at it and it will just disappear. It's the equivalent of you see it, but you just don't touch it, you know. You're on a diet, there's a donut there, you see it, but you decide to not touch it, turn and walk away. Whereas if you eat the donut, well then it makes you eat another donut and so on, and they all get together and you're ruined. Might not go exactly like that, but I don't know whether they conspire against us or not. So negative arisings have a cascade effect, but if they're caught by mindfulness, in the very moment of their arising, they are completely powerless and absolutely, totally, easily to not let them develop. So that's the goal of mindfulness. It needs to be really in effect all the time. If you're just sort of generally mindful most of the time, you're going to pick up things after they're already there. You're not going to pick them up right at the very moment. One time I was in retreat, I think in Sri Lanka, and I noticed that I was picking them up too late. And so I made this resolution that for the next 3 minutes, I will pick whatever arises up at the moment it arises. And it took a big effort. And then I kept having that attitude, you know, as if for the next 3 minutes, but when the 3 minutes ended, I just kept that attitude. So for the next 3 minutes, and I stayed in that attitude, and I caught absolutely everything as it arose for 2 weeks. And I went into this great state of clarity, virtually perfect mindfulness. I only had a few arisings every hour, between 6 and 10 generally, and I didn't go with them, you know. They would pop up, I would look at them, and they would just sort of, it's like they just melted into the air or dissolved into the air. And so during that time, after I started doing that, I did not entertain one single negative emotion for over 2 weeks. I'm not saying don't do loving kindness meditation. I'm not saying don't do Manjushri. One should do those things. It probably in reality goes like this. If you were to try right now, catch every negative arising as it arose for the next 3 minutes and then keep doing that, it probably wouldn't work. One needs to have a substantial amount of 24-hour-a-day mindfulness developed in order for that to work. And a lot of times your attachment to the negative arising would be so strong that even if you caught it as arising, you would let it develop anyhow, because you like it. People sometimes like being angry, they like being in desire, they like being in a state of pride. Sometimes they like being in a state of ignorance. We have strong attachments to these negative arisings because they bring us to our comfort zone. They make us feel that everything about the world is right now. So if you do loving kindness, what it tends to do is chip away at that fundamental attachment to the hatred and anger states that will allow you one day to be present when anger arises and to not choose it, to just let it go. So in an ideal world, we would all do that 3-minute practice, and we would do it 24 hours a day until we awoke. But in reality, the strength of our attachments would probably subvert that process. So these other practices chip away at the attachment. So you should still keep trying to catch them as they arise, but you should also at the same time be chipping away at the attachment behind it. Does that make sense? Yeah. what happens then when you catch them as they arise is that the skandhas get the message. So I've told the story of one time I was meditating in Thailand, and I had a crystal clear mind, and the thought arose, you can't always get what you want. And the skandhas started to create depression so I wouldn't have to face that ugly truth. So they thought 3 months of depression was a fair price to pay for avoiding 5 or 10 minutes of discomfort over this truth that I didn't like. And so when I saw that at the moment arose, I sat up and I said out loud, I don't choose that. And the depression reversed itself and went away, and that particular depression never came back. So the skandhas got the message that I did not choose 3 months of depression to avoid 5 or 10 minutes of some unpleasant state. So the skandhas don't give you a hard time in that regard, you know. Also, when you start to have enough clarity that and no attachment, when something like hatred arises, you experience it as the skandhas saying, please sir, at this time we recommend anger, or we recommend hatred, and you just say, well, no thanks. And they're totally okay with that. They're absolutely totally okay. They will not give you a hard time over that. There is not a power struggle. Right now your skandhas run you totally. But if you decide to take charge yourself and run yourself totally, the skandhas become really happy over that. It's almost as if they didn't really want to be running things, but nobody else was, so they had to. And, oh, now you stepped up and you're doing it. Well, thank you, you know. They're happy about that. The skandhas, however, are not happy about going into the unknown unless it's accompanied by bliss. If you can take the leap into the unknown but somehow persuade the bliss to come before you go, the skandhas will be totally okay with leaping. Similarly, when you try to develop the jhanas, for example, which are accompanied by bliss, the skandhas will not be on board with the process of developing them. They will keep suggesting that you go get your pleasure in the ways that you've been accustomed to, or get your wisdom in the ways you've been accustomed to. But the first time you experience bliss in the jhanas, then the skandhas are all in favor of the jhanas. Why didn't you say so? You know, oh yeah, let's do this every day, and they will cooperate with it. You know, but the skandhas are not bad guys. They're not there to harm you or to do anything. They're there because this symbiotic relationship has developed over countless eons, and if you start to work your way into ending it and running your own life, they won't give you a problem. There's no power struggle, you know. When your non-existent ego dies, it does not feel any pain. It totally doesn't mind dying because it isn't there. You know, in some traditions, like the tarot cards, the Western mystery schools that produced that, they have a card called the Hanged Man, which is the death of the ego, you know, and so there's a frame and then a rope around somebody's feet, and they're hanging upside down, but the head is radiant. There's radiance around the head, you know. That so-called death is not painful. and therefore it doesn't need to be feared. I know I've just run over, but I want to tell one story to illustrate the ego, which some of you have heard before. When I was young, I had a phobia of dogs, and one night about 2 in the morning I was walking home along a residential street, and a few blocks in front of me I saw a really big dog. There's the main sidewalk on the street and the sidewalk leading to the house, and the dog was just beside both of them, facing across the street. And so I walked, and I already had fear of this dog, you know, and so I wanted to get closer because maybe the dog would go back inside or move off or something. But if it didn't, then I was planning to cross the street and go on the other side of the street or something else to avoid it. And when you have a phobia of dogs, they sense it and they become hostile, and they treat you very different than they do somebody who doesn't have a fear of dogs. So eventually I got close enough, and what I saw was that there were 2 bushes. There was no dog, but the outline of the 2 bushes from a distance made a perfect dog. You know, the legs were there, the head was there, the ears were there, the body was there. It was perfect, you know. So that is the ego. The ego is an apparition, an optical illusion. It appears to be there, but when you actually go to find it, there is nothing there. Hence, it doesn't need to die. You know, if I were to go to that whoever owned that house and say, you should really have your dog on a rope, you know, you shouldn't let him just sit out there by the sidewalk, he'd think I'm crazy, and I would be, you know, because there was no dog. So your ego isn't your enemy either. It just isn't there. It's just a misperception. You have senses and you have self-awareness, and the senses give you this illusion of experience, and the self-awareness, the self-cognizance, you add all of that up and you think you're a self, and plus as a child you're conditioned to think of yourself as a self. You're taught that. Newborn babies probably don't really see any boundary between them and other stuff. I don't know for sure. So there's a lot of good news in this, but one should be aware of the downside of negative emotions. And I haven't even touched on when you engage in a negative emotion and follow it through, you create negative karma. That may rub off on other people, you may harm them too. But through mindfulness, you can transcend all of these things and live more in accord with reality as it is. Reality as it is does not include suffering. So I've heard. Any questions before we stop? Yeah.
I'm just wondering about the skandhas and positive emotions. So if you are in a state of positive emotions, are the skandhas down there cheering for you? Or are they trying to find a way to bring up a negative emotion? How's that interaction between skandhas and positive?
Yeah, well, when you're young, and various experiences present themselves to you, some of them you find quite pleasant, and you in effect go into a state of yes to whatever that is. And the skandhas notice that, and with positive things, with pleasant things, the skandhas want to make it happen again and again and again.
Oh, okay.
So that includes things like, feeling empathy with a good friend, or, it's not just physical pleasures or whatever. It's all kinds of things. And so those are also suggestions of the skandhas, but most people don't see any problem on the positive side, because it's always associated with pleasant things, nice things, fun things, and so on. Eventually that needs to be seen for what it is, but you do that by approaching it from the negative side. And then through that you will come to see directly for yourself the mechanism of how the skandhas interpret what's outside and what's in front of you, and how they then turn that into a suggestion. And you will then eventually see that for the positives as well.
Oh, okay.
And there's no problem with that, And in the meantime, you can enjoy the positives,
So there's emptiness in both of them, the positive and the negative. They just...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question's a little bit related to that. Shogam Trungpa used to say that it was essential to enter the Bodhisattva path, Mahayana path, to develop a sense of the egolessness of self,
Yeah.
and the egolessness of phenomena.
Yeah.
And it seems that I haven't been here every week, but whatever level you're teaching at, you're using the skandhas as a way of showing or developing the egolessness of self. And so a lot of the things you say are very solid. There's good and bad. You're paying a price for karma and things like that. And so I have two questions about the egolessness of phenomenon. One is, what would the practice that Trungpa taught, and I understand there's different practices, but the practice he was teaching had to, when you develop the egolessness of self, that gives you no reference point. You give up your reference point as yourself, and of course your ego. And then when you have worked through that, and then you go back to your good old-fashioned, your old neurosis, your old negative emotions, all the things that used to come up, you can then just see them for what they are, as you say, and then that shows the non-origination of the phenomenon itself, these things that are causing you pain, all of the realities and so on. So my question, the first question is, what is the relevance of that sort of approach, where you're looking at the emptiness basically of a phenomenon in whatever in your practices that you're talking about. The second question is for a fairly average newcomer to Buddhist philosophy with some amount of realizations. A lot of practitioners, develop a kind of, not that unusual understanding of karma working through them. That it's not, I am not hating you. It's the hatred that's coming through me, or this was not my fault. This was something coming through me, and you look at an energy. You're looking in an energy way, but of course it's not fully developed as in your practice to see the non-origination of it, or the what he would call absolute absolute bodhisattva, absolute emptiness without reference point. Mm-hmm. So the reason I'm asking that is that what I understand Trungpa to have meant by the egolessness of phenomenon came fairly easy to me. So I'm wondering if maybe I'm mistaken, or is that just sort of a stepping stone?
So we did talk in great detail about the egolessness of phenomena in other talks in the past. Right now we're focusing on this, but what I will say to answer both of those questions is that things can only happen dependent on other things having happened before them. So you cannot start very easily by trying to understand the egoless phenomena. If you start there, you almost always develop an intellectual understanding rather than a true seeing of that. What you start with, according to the Buddha, is you start with mindfulness of the body and getting to know the body. When you have some skill in that, you naturally become mindful of the sensations and things that come through the senses. When you have a good grasp of that, you then become aware of how the body turns that into perception, adds up certain parts, and it has a certain shape and a certain color and a certain activity. Well, that's a dog, or that's something else. And then you have reactions to various things that come through perception. Mental formations, you need to become familiar with those. And then the overall result of all that is ongoing consciousness. And so you have to become mindful of the consciousness. To try start with the egolessness of self, it doesn't work if you don't have all the other steps in order. There may be some Vajrayana practices that Trungpa teaches that I don't know about, but generally you need to develop this thorough familiarity with the skandhas, and then through that one can come to truly see the egolessness of self. And in my opinion, it's only then that you can come to have any kind of true understanding of egolessness of phenomena. So these are like building blocks. You don't build a house starting with the roof generally. You start with the foundation and build up. And as I understand it, this is the sequence of how things go. When people start with something out of order, very often it converts into concepts and ideas rather than the actual reality behind what's going on. So I'm not familiar with those teachings that you're describing, but from what I hear, this is what I would say, that you do egolessness of phenomena last. Similarly, in Mahamudra, Mahamudra starts with things like the Ngundro practices, prostrations, and all that sort of stuff. Then you develop shamatha, then you develop insight, and you eventually reach a point where you can be introduced to emptiness, or be introduced to, they tend to use the word mind, If you try to start at the top, again, the perception of reality as it is generally not possible unless you have built up from the bottom, and so one then forms these things into ideas and concepts. anyhow, that's what I would say. I don't know if it's a satisfactory answer, but
That sort of answered the first question. I guess I didn't ask properly. I wasn't suggesting to start with the egolessness of phenomenon. My personal experience was that after having, you would have to understand egolessness of self in order to do the practices he was talking about. But at that point, these other realizations came fairly easily, whereas, getting over the ego of self might have taken 20 years. The other things that had already been sort of seeds planted, and a lot of the way it seems to me that Trungpa dealt with his Western students was the idea of a glimpse of the Vajrayana, a glimpse of this or that, and a lot of the shamatha and vipassana techniques were in order to nourish that glimpse. But he wouldn't deny that his students had some understanding, so he would say, well, this is Vijnana from a Vajrayana point of view, or something like that. And I'm not, it doesn't matter to me what things are called. I was just wondering if that sort of layperson's understanding that I was saying of the effect of karma as energy rather than personal involvement, if that was somewhat valid, and I guess not that it's a good idea to start from that sort of understanding, but I found that very well developed by the time I had gotten there on the path. It wasn't a leap for me to see that big of a leap for me to see the egolessness of phenomena, having seen the egolessness itself.
okay. Was there another question?
Yeah, I have a...
Huh? Yeah?
Sorry if I'm the only one here who doesn't know. I'm wondering, could you please define skandhas for me?
Skandhas are what you think of as yourself, your body, the sensory data that comes through the body. You then assemble that into perception. You then have reactions to what you perceive, and this is all creates an ongoing consciousness that is having all these things, and they all happen together.
That's just a minor point, I think. How do people become reach or these two realms you mentioned? I think it was the Daiwas and the Titans, was it?
Yeah.
How do they become that, or why do they become that?
Well, I don't have the text with me right now, but you need to have very high degree of attainment and concentration, generosity, compassion, wisdom, and some other things. But very, very high attainment and concentration, to get to the Deva realms. Generally, mastering some, if not all, of the jhanas. And I don't know the details of how you get to the one just below that. I think you do similar stuff, but just not as far, But I don't know. Good, we're only 23 minutes over. Let's dedicate any merit from this and from all sources and times to all beings, that each without exception attain the ultimate for themselves.